You're listening to CreepGeeks Podcast. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/cheapgeek. So it begins again. Welcome back to the CreepGeeks Podcast. This is episode number 178.
Guess who got their space license back?
Yeah. And we're back.
Yep.
Okay, so we got a lot of stuff to talk about today. This is the CreepGeeks Podcast, where we talk about weird and wonderful stuff like that, paranormal and weird news, and occasionally we throw out some tech stuff. And today is kind of tech-related, but it's also historical. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all about space, man. We're going to talk about space.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, it's not all about space, but it's mostly about space. Momentous? How do you say that? Monumentous thing has happened. So anyway, it's kind of a thing. So we're going to talk about it today, but this podcast is about what?
Well, the CreepGeeks Podcast is a offbeat news podcast that takes a lighthearted approach to the paranormal, cryptid, strange, the silly, and trending tech topics circulating the web.
Yes. Okay. So anyway, let's do this. If you'd like to support the podcast, we have a phone number that you can call and leave us a message or maybe a story or something you'd like to talk about or you'd like us to talk about. That'd be No, that's not the number. What is it?
575-208-4025.
Yes, very nice. Okay. So we're going to move into the podcast and kind of talk a little bit about some things that are, what happened there? You moved something on the desk and something just shot off into space.
Yeah, pretty much.
Like a rocket. Yeah. Anyway, as we move into the podcast, one of the things that we'd like to do, and if you've been listening to the podcast, you know we do this frequently. It's called basically Interesting Random Factoids. And if you've never followed the podcast before, welcome. And one of the things that we talk about are interesting random factoids.
Okay.
Yes. And here lately, we've been doing coronavirus search terms or search trends as our interesting random factoid. And today is no different. Except we're going to add something a little bit different to it. So it'll be an addition to, because it's something we found to be super interesting.
Okay.
Yes. So as I wait for the page to load, we'll move into our interesting random factoids about coronavirus search terms and trends. And we've noticed that these things have changed as the virus has changed and everything else has changed. Right?
Yeah.
It's a moving thing, man. It's like it sort of changes all the time. People's worries, concerns, or interest about this whole virus and being, it changes.
Yeah.
So guess what the top search trend is for this? It's up 5,000%. What do you think it is?
I already know what it is.
Well, I know you're supposed to.
Okay.
You're supposed to play along. This is part of the show.
What is it?
Okay, and that's it, everybody. We're done with the podcast today. We're going to go ahead and regroup and give us another shot. No. Economic stimulus checks is the breakout search. Yeah. 5,000%. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And the top issue is unemployment becomes the top searched news issue.
Well, yeah, it's still going
It's pretty
crazy.
high, and people are still filing.
Yeah. Or more layoffs or furloughs are happening.
Right.
Yeah.
And right now, another search term that has a record high is exercise.
Well, you have to mention the first one is cooking, and as a result, exercise. Because you've been cooking at home and eating all your quarantine snacks, you're going to probably eventually search for exercise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And coronavirus has been the most searched topic of 2020. And I'd just like to say no shit. I'm just saying. I mean, seriously, everybody knows that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, no duh. And, and then you have other things too, like all the other stuff. But hopefully in the next couple of days, some of this will maybe shift a little bit. But there's some pretty crazy stories out there, like monkeys steal coronavirus blood.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Or schools are closed across America.
Yeah. And so it kind of is what it is. But I thought it was pretty funny. 5,000% increase in search of economic stimulus checks. And that's because we're still waiting to see if we get another one.
Yeah.
I'm of the mind that since you gave us one, why not give us two? You know what I mean? It kind of makes sense. You should have probably done more than just the one, because one helps, but two would help a little bit better. Especially now, since they're trying to get people to go back out and sort of re-enter into the world.
Yeah.
And open stuff back up, which I still think personally is a little bit of a mistake, because there are places that are opening up that are now closing back down again because they're like, oh, it's just too soon, man, too soon.
Or places especially in our region, like the South, that have reopened, and now suddenly there's just these spikes in cases.
Well, yeah.
And it's but they're such a dramatic spike. You're like, how bad are we at practicing social distancing and choosing to avoid each other?
Well, it's not that we're bad, okay? We just haven't done this before. Everybody acts like the H1N1 was a pandemic, and what was the other one? SARS was a pandemic and all stuff, and they weren't. They were not pandemics. They were just basically cases of those disease. They were small.
Or maybe they were pandemics in other countries.
Yeah, but they weren't pandemics here. Yeah. This is the first full-on pandemic we've had since the Spanish influenza outbreak of 1918 or whatever it was.
Well, remember in 2017 when I got influenza A and...
Yes.
Yeah, and the state of New Mexico actually quarantined me to our own house.
Right.
For 2 weeks.
But that's not a pandemic where it was okay, now everybody gets quarantined.
It was just like people who got influenza A in that particular state, we were all asked to stay home for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I was one of those people, but I practiced, the quarantine methods that at the time were appropriate. So,
well, it is what it is. And you can't necessarily blame it on people not doing social distancing because, okay, if you're social distancing yourself, and even if you're wearing masks and personal protective equipment and stuff like that, it's not to say that you're not going to get it. I mean, those are protective measures that you take. You can still get it.
Yeah.
Because people still carry this thing without even knowing they're carrying it.
True.
So, and there's people that have been carrying it. Also, there's the idea that this has been around for much, 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 much longer than we actually have known about. And you got people that carry it, and they're like, hey, I'm cool, man. I'm just kind of carrying this around. I didn't know. I don't have any symptoms, so I'm not going to get tested. And then they just spread it.
You know what's funny? The news is just now talking about something we talked about months ago, which was, did some of us have coronavirus in November, December?
Yep.
And they're just
or even as early as September.
Yeah, and they're just now, approaching that subject.
Right.
Which means...
We've talked about this for months off and on. So if you followed the podcast, you've heard us lament about coronavirus and that it's coming and all that stuff. And
yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of times, it's just, kind of that thought that, oh, hey, we're living on borrowed time, man. We're all going to get it. And hopefully by then we have this sort of herd immunization thing going on. Anyway, that's enough about coronavirus because we're going to talk about space.
Yeah.
But before we get to space, we have to talk about the additional thing that we're adding to our interesting random factoid, something that we came across, which we think is pretty interesting and also important to talk about, right?
Yeah.
And these are off a website that you can go and check out, and you probably should bookmark it somewhere if you're listening. It's basically FDA recalls.
Wow.
Yeah, Food and Drug Administration, right? Excuse me. So if you do FDA.gov and then look for safety recalls, you can find all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things that I came across that affects a lot of people, if you have, type 2 diabetes?
I think so.
Yeah, I think it's type 2. If you have type 2 diabetes, chances are you're taking metformin. Metformin is a drug that's designed to control your sugars and all that stuff, so that makes you able to manage your diabetes by taking a pill. It's like 30 million people, I think, take this. Right?
Yeah.
Well, evidently there's a recall on metformin hydrochloride, and these are the extended release tablets, 500 milligrams, due to NDMA.
N as in Nancy.
That's what I said. Yep.
DMA.
Nancy, Delta, Michael, Alpha.
Yeah.
I didn't say Apple. I said Alpha.
120 million people worldwide take metformin.
See, it's even more than we thought.
Yeah.
And so 120 million people worldwide are taking metformin, and these are the extended release tabs that actually have a higher concentration of this stuff, NDMA,
Yeah.
which is in a lot of other drugs. It's basically being recalled as well, including lawsuits, and it's possibility that the wrong levels of this NDMA stuff can cause cancer.
Now, I do want to put in here, FDA pushes metformin recalls for 5 specific drug makers.
Yes.
Of metformin. So
Yes.
it's not all of metformin, but specifically it's come under the magnifying glass of the FDA by 5 drug makers.
And here's the deal. What they say, to paraphrase what it says, and if you want to check it out, you should go to FDA.gov, is basically keep taking your medicine, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you might want to contact your, primary care physician or whatever and bring it up that, hey, there's a recall on metformin. Is there an alternative or what's going on here? And as this progresses, I'm sure this is going to be a lot bigger. But we just like to put out there, if you have diabetes and you're using metformin to help control that, there's been a recall on it. You might want to check it out.
Yeah.
That's all we're saying. We're not medical people. We're not professionals by any means. We're people just talking into a microphone. The only thing I can say is I take metformin, and I'm a little alerted by this and concerned. And if I find out any more information that's relevant to what's going on, I'll put it out in the podcast. So all you tens of listeners out there, chances are one of you has diabetes and maybe taking this, maybe it'll be helpful to you. Maybe not.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, hey, if you got diabetes, why don't you, throw it out there, let us know. But I'm like, nah, probably don't want to tell everybody you got diabetes because of a whole HIPAA and stuff like that. However, FDA.gov has a lot of recalls, and it's kind of an interesting site to go through because we found some things that we thought to be interesting in here. It's like, huh.
Yeah. Like snacks and like candies and just stuff.
Like some stuff, it's like, oh, this mint chocolate chip with hidden spinach ice cream may have listeria in it.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, and there's like a list, and it just goes back, and it's like currently a lot of recalls out there of which you don't hear about.
Like crackers, I really like. They have undeclared peanut in them.
Right now, there's 1,281 recalls of stuff that you may or may not be using as a consumer. Now, a lot of these recalls are not necessarily recalls per se, but they have the reason being as like, oh, okay, this particular product, whatever it might be, has undeclared wheat and soy.
Okay.
Yeah, and some of them say, oh, this particular product has undeclared milk. And you're like, well, okay, I'm not allergic to milk, so I don't care. But imagine if you're like a vegan who doesn't want to use anything from animals. Well, where does milk come from? Mostly cows. I mean, you can get goat milk and stuff like that. You can even milk a kitten.
Ew.
Have you seen like Meet the Fockers where he's like milking a kitten?
No, I haven't.
That's awful. And I don't know how you milk almonds and oats and other stuff out like. And I'm gonna go on the record saying, okay, almond milk and things like that is garbage. All of it sucks. It's not milk.
Stop.
It's true though.
Well, here's one for queso sauce, and for some reason it has undeclared cashews in it.
Yeah. To me, I love cashews. I don't have a problem with that. I think that's a bonus.
It's like, wow, I got
But somebody else out there is like, this queso
it.
is spicy. It makes my throat close up. So anyway, moving back into the podcast, we're kind of on a roll today because we have stuff to do, but we thought we'd talk about it. But yeah, we're going to keep some of the FDA recall information in there. So with our interesting random factoids, we're going to have random factoids and maybe some interesting random FDA factoids, like as in, like, did you know that they recalled cookies because they have undisclosed amounts of kittens in them?
Stop.
You know what I mean? Because I think it's kind of interesting. So
I'd like to remind everybody we are an entertainment podcast. Entertainment.
Okay, first off, how dare you? This is a value thing going on here. You don't tell people what we do and what we don't do. You know what?
What?
That's like a false accusatory statement thing that you just made, much like the Russian space head who accuses the U.S. and Elon Musk of planning nuclear war in space.
This is unbelievable. I'm sorry.
I think it's freaking awesome. So now, okay, here's the deal. And this is from Mysterious Universe, one of our favorite writers of all time, Paul Seaborn. And his real name is Paul Seaburn, right? He wrote this, and I read it. I'm like, oh, that's pretty interesting. And it says, at the time of this writing, Elon Musk's SpaceX rocket had not yet launched humans into space, but even a successful mission probably won't quell the wrath of the head of the Russian space agency.
That's pretty ominous.
I know, that's why I'm like, ooh, what's going on here, right? And it says, no, he's not just mad about losing the business of taking astronauts to the ISS and back, which actually was a huge part, believe it or not, of their space program budget.
Yeah.
Was toting people back and forth because they were the only ones that were giving anybody a ride to the space station. Was the Russians. You went to like somewhere in Russia. I can't remember exactly where it is. Is it Kazakhstan maybe? Anyway, you went somewhere to Russia. They put you in on this old Soyuz capsule and they shot you up there. And then basically that's how you got your ride. And with that, they also packed up stuff and brought supplies and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Right? And we haven't been to space on our own, sort of from our own soil, under our own power in over 9 years since the last space shuttle mission.
Mm-hmm.
Which is far too long because we were space for decades. And then, due to budgetary constraints and other stuff, they just let the shine just fade. The luster of the space program and all that stuff, where we were like technologically the most advanced and all this stuff, they just let it go away. And I personally blame a couple presidents for this. But anyway, and I get it. So NASA lost its luster in this whole thing. It's sort of, it's like they didn't want responsibility to. But anyway, we're back shooting people into space. Now, this may be a little premature because they still have to go through certification and stuff for the current Crew X module that's up there whizzing around with Bob and Doug.
Yeah.
Right? But if everything goes as well as the launch did that we watched, then we should be back. We got our space license back.
Yeah.
And honestly, here's the way I look at it. I think short of the thing blowing up and killing the astronauts, I think it's a done deal, man. Because from what I understand, NASA is super happy. So I contacted my source on the internet, which is basically just the internet in general, and NASA seems to be happy about the whole thing. So like, I don't have any secret source or whatever. But when I read this thing about the nuclear war in space, I'm like, huh.
Yeah.
It says, interview on the YouTube podcast, Solio Live, because I'm not Russian. I have been to Russia. Fun fact. It's been a couple weeks there. Anyway, this guy, Dmitry Rogozin, basically is the head of Russian state agency, Roscosmos, right?
Yeah.
And told the host, Vladimir Solio, or whatever his last name is, I can't pronounce it, that he believes that Musk is serious about detonating 10,000 nuclear warheads on Mars to terraform the planet into one with an atmosphere and climate that can support humans. And Musk's SpaceX partnership with NASA is proof that the U.S. government approves of this.
Okay.
All right, now look, here's the deal. I mean, call me crazy, but if you blow up 10,000 nuclear warheads on Mars, doesn't that pretty much take that planet out of the realm of possibility for, I don't know, thousands of years? Or maybe hundreds of years?
I don't know.
I mean, granted, the atmosphere is kind of thin and there's huge temperature changes and stuff like that, but still you're going to have radioactive fallout and you're also going to have radioactive exposure and things like that. I would think that it would take the planet out of play for a long time.
Okay.
Yeah. And it says, we have commented on each and every such anti-Russian attack where are basically nothing but the United States attempts to divert public attention from the real threats in space and to justify its moves to deploy weapons in outer space and obtain extra financing for such causes. So this Russian foreign ministry spokeswoman, Maria Zakharova, anyway, she basically said that she's not happy with the Space Force idea.
Okay.
Especially with the recent announcement and unveiling of its first weapon, a satellite jammer, and its first mission with the mysterious X-37B spaceplane, both occurring within the past month. Yeah. And so SpaceX and its CEO and founder's grandiose nuclear plans for Mars with no denunciation by NASA or U.S. government. And, in fact, President Trump has had to say he likes rockets, and he does good at rockets, too, by the way. We're talking about Elon Musk. So basically, they're saying that since there's been no public outcry or anything coming from the top, like with NASA and the president and White House and all that stuff, that we're just, like, going along with it. Okay. So Russia has been mad that we have a Space Force, a publicly declared Space Force, so we basically can militarize space. Because they don't really, their mission that we have is not really that, clear. But basically what their mission is that if we go out and we said, we're going to claim something, we're going to claim anyway. And we have a space jammer satellite, sort of weapon system out there. And the Russians weren't happy about it.
But
now here's the deal. Think about this. The average technology that you have sitting in front of you right now.
Yeah.
The military has a version of that technology that's at least 10 to 30 years more advanced than what you're currently using, is the idea behind whatever's going on.
Okay.
So the idea that we just now all of a sudden have space jamming satellites that, maybe jam satellite transmissions or whatever is really old.
Yeah. I mean that harkens back to like almost Cold War tactics.
Exactly.
Like theorizing.
Like rods of God and stuff like that coming from, space where you can launch these like titanium rods drop them from satellites and whatever.
But for me, the fact that NASA has partnered with SpaceX, which is a private company, speaks to commercialization, not militarization of space. Just the concept in itself. I mean, this is Elon Musk, this is Tesla, this is SpaceX. It is the commercialization of space rather than the militarization.
Right. Which is one of the reasons why I think we actually created a Space Force.
Yeah.
We don't have to, eventually we will not have to rely on commercial means to get out into space or do whatever. I'm sure we already have our own way of doing that, but why not go ahead and put it out there and establish it beforehand so if something gets out.
But almost like with the colonization of America, you had boats that were chartered by private companies or private industries, and then you had the Queen's Navy who was supposed to help and assist. But primarily, the thing that was leading the way were these boats chartered by these private organizations to increase westward expansion.
Yes.
I don't think this is the first thing on NASA's mind right now. I'm kind
of...
No,
I don't either, but it is on Russia's because the big deal is that, okay, they've already lowered their cost for launches. Yeah. Which is already less than what SpaceX is offering, right? And so they think it's an escalation of the Cold War in space, and they think it's not about money. And it's like we see such attempts and we consider them unacceptable, and we will hinder this to the greatest extent possible. Which basically means that, what are they going to do? Own space weapons, cyber warfare, accelerate their own plans to send humans to Mars. Who knows, right? The whole thing has become a little bit of a race. It's more of a silent race, right? It's like a quiet race. Yeah. So they're not putting it out there. So anyway, I thought it was a pretty interesting article. And basically, since the first launch by SpaceX, and this is a demo, this was a demonstration launch to see that the actual crew module will be successful or not. Since it actually has been successfully completed to the first part of it, which was getting these astronauts up into low Earth orbit, I think if all goes well, we're going to see a lot of angry words coming out of Russia and all this other crazy stuff because they will have lost a large chunk of their space program revenue. And, I should probably say sympathetically, I don't care. I'm glad it's back to the U.S. I really don't. And it's not one of those things where it's like, I was in the military. I used to hunt and track submarines by sound, all that sort of thing. And our biggest threat that we always worried about was the Soviet Union.
Okay.
Because the principal ship of the Soviet Navy was a submarine, straight up. And what do submarines carry? A lot of them carry nuclear weapons that can destroy the world. Right? As do ours. We have them too. So that Cold War thing, I served during the Cold War, and the Cold War went along for a long time. And it just kind of is what it is. And the fact that people say the Cold War is dead, that is not true, man. The Cold War has sort of came back with a little bit of a resurgence. Now we get to add space to it.
I know, but I don't think that's the mindset right here. I think it's their mindset.
No, it's totally their mindset. But see, that's the thing, though. They started revitalizing their military and making their military more modern, during Putin's second or first or whatever. He's been in office for a while.
Yeah. He
made that a priority. And once he made the priority, because everything was sort of ratcheting down, for a period of time, the Russians went through a little bit of sort of coming of their own, trying to figure out what they were going to do since they allegedly destroyed communism, right? Sort of kicked it out there and became capitalists, but not really.
Yeah.
They had to kind of figure some things out. And they started selling oil and doing all sorts of crazy stuff and started revitalizing their military. And then it seemingly out of nowhere, Putin started making these little jabs at the U.S. to kind of see what the U.S. would do. And I will say, sadly, that the president at the time didn't do very much to do anything, and they weren't very scary. So basically, Putin called him out.
Yeah, but...
Said, I'm not afraid of you guys. I'm going to do whatever I want. And see, the funny thing is the reason why this is maybe not so important, but important to me, is that this whole thing and the fact that communism sort of died and all that stuff was, one of the things that Reagan did when he went over there and he went out in the cold with no coat and was a tough guy and used to joke around about bombing Russia, which he did several times at the beginnings of his radio address. They were scared of him. They thought he was a cowboy. Russians blinked, and it became a little bit of embarrassment to him. So now when Putin got in there, he threw out a threat, and we blinked. And so here we are, like 10 years later, happy that we can finally get back into space on our own steam. That's Pepper, everybody. Pepper says, I agree. So, yeah. But I thought that was kind of crazy. I'm like, what? And what kind of crazy stuff is that? Let's take 10,000 warheads, shoot them up into Mars and all that stuff. And, the Russians were like, everybody should be unhappy about this. I think that most people are like, well, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
But see,
right?
now I want to go look up the science, like, because that theory sounds like it's straight out of Total Recall.
Yeah, well, terraforming, but they didn't launch nukes. They just fired up some old school old school Martian, whatever stuff that was left there. Remember the big 3-hand thing that Schwarzenegger had to put his grubby hand in?
Yeah, but and see, in our narrow capacity of understanding some of this stuff, is it equivocal? Like, is the concept of the nuke and the terraforming, would it take such a drastic change? Now I want to know the science.
Well, maybe, but I think there's probably better ways to do it than put 10,000 nuclear warheads there. I mean, what's to say that didn't cause Mars to go under in the first place?
Yeah.
There's a huge theory that we're just Martians. That something happened and basically took, all the, anyway, I'm not going to get into that. That's an all-day thing. And somebody will comment, well, what you really meant to say was, it's like, I don't care enough to go down that rabbit hole right now. Because it is indeed a rabbit hole. But anyway, let's talk about SpaceX and the Crew Dragon capsule and Bob and Doug and all that stuff.
Okay.
So one of the things that they have is like Meet Bob and Doug, the NASA astronauts about to make history. They're hilarious and kind of goofy. And I'm like, well, that's pretty cool, Washington Post, to put that sort of thing up there. But, I mean, these guys are some of the most senior and most professional astronauts that NASA actually has. Senior, probably in age a little bit, but also the most experienced. So you got, these guys, and you got Bob, right, and Doug. They're trying to humanize them a little bit and try to make them more personable, I guess, because, back when the olden days, these guys with NASA and astronauts and stuff like that, they were like the best of the best, the right stuff. They were basically rock stars, right?
Yeah.
But they want to humanize Bob and Doug to make them out to be like just, cool guys going into space, man. It's all cool. And see, what I've noticed, it seems that with this entire space thing, right, and the fact it's commercialized, it almost seems like it's the exact opposite, or what they're going for is the exact opposite of what NASA and the government would do to launch stuff into space. NASA was all a certain way. It was like military, sort of refined. These guys are the best of the best and all that sort of thing. And, if things looked a certain way, they were designed to get the job done. And, these seems like with this particular setup, the rocket looks amazing. Everything is sleek and modern. People are really cool. Everything is cool and hip, right? Like even the name of the drone recovery ship that captures like the first stage back. What was that thing called? Remember?
The drone ship?
Yeah.
Oh, I Still Love You or something like that? Yeah. It was...
And, NASA would never have anything like that. They would have like, recovery drone ship, it'd be RD3 or whatever. It's like they've deliberately gone the opposite way to make this whole commercial enterprise really a sort of distinct difference between the way things were and how they are now. And I'm cool with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, the Soviets, they reduce their cost. If Crew X, Dragon capsule module and all that stuff through SpaceX and Elon Musk, if this is a successful venture, they're going to lose some money because we're going to keep doing it. We're going to keep using them.
It was called Of Course I Still Love You. So,
yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Of course I still love you. And it's going to become a thing. We're going to keep launching people up into space. And, it's going to be, it was a good time. I watched it. You watched it. We thought it was pretty cool. Right?
Yeah.
Seeing old Bob Binkin and Doug Hurley.
I actually kind of held my breath until they actually got into.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what bugged me, and I think it bugged you a little bit, was we didn't actually see the rocket land back onto the drone ship.
Yeah, it was kind of strange. It was like we were watching it come down, and then they did cut away to one camera because it looked like they lost transmission or whatever, and then they came back, and it was like, there it is, it's done, and there wasn't even any like smoke or anything coming off this thing. It's like it landed that quick, and there's just completely shut down. There's no, it's like what? So there were some things that honestly, if you're one of those people that look deeply into things to see if there's an ulterior motive behind them, there was a lot of the broadcasts that we watched that you could basically look at it a different way. Like I want to see the footage, but it won't matter, of that thing landing there because when one shot it was coming down, the next shot it was already there, man. And like it was already there with no smoke or anything coming off of it. And it's just like, wait a minute.
Yeah. That bugged me.
Yeah, because it said live. So how live was that if it came down that fast? It was like, that's it. They shut it down. No more smoke, no exhaust from the the rockets or anything like that. It was that quick. I don't know. Something's a little weird about that.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, overall, it was a successful sort of thing. It's almost like they lost footage and sort of maybe fed some old footage. I don't know. I don't want to I don't want to say it.
Yeah, don't.
Yeah. But they launched from Pad 39A, went up into space, and they have they say stuff like it's a fully autonomous next generation capsule outfitted with Tesla-like touchscreens and temperature controls that allow the astronauts to keep the cabin at between 65 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh.
That's nice.
Yeah.
So Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley, and these guys are former military pilots, right? And astronauts, and they both went on the space shuttle and flew a couple missions apiece, and they've done all that stuff. The most senior dudes, right, get to fly off on this thing. And, they went from old school, like, knobs and levers and flip switches and stuff like that to just basically, burp, pressing a button. Burp.
Yeah.
That's got to be huge. I mean, they're not that old. They're like in their 50s and maybe 50s, late 40s.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of like,
They both met their wives in the NASA astronaut class of 2000.
Yeah. Almost 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Actually, it is 20 years ago.
Behnken married Megan MacArthur, and Hurley married Karen Nyberg.
Nice.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
Yep. So this mission Demo 2 was test flight designed to ensure the rocket and spacecraft could fly humans safely. And once complete, NASA and SpaceX will review the data and certify the spacecraft for additional missions that would regularly fly as many as 4 astronauts to the space station and back. And one of the things they said during the broadcast that we watched is that, since the main part of the rocket gets come back and gets refurbished and ready to shoot back up again, they could turn it around in a week.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I think realistically it's probably longer than a week, but if they have 2 or 3 of these things ready to go, then they can just sort of research, what do you call it?
But Elon, he probably has 2 or 3 already ready to go.
I don't know, because they blew up a bunch.
I know.
And that's the thing about SpaceX. They, just for as many successful launches as they had, they've blown some stuff up too.
Because I would say he probably has 5, but he's blown up a couple, so he's down to 2 or 3 now.
Yeah. And, one of the things that he says is, quote unquote, space is hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And it's probably a whole lot harder than he thought it was when they started this whole thing back in, 2001 or 2 or whatever it was?
I think it's 2002.
Yeah.
And, but when they finally started taking him seriously and he changed his password to, like,
I love NASA.
I love NASA, yeah.
I hope he's changed it since then. Because they gave it out over, television. And so everybody's probably trying to, log into their Tesla with I love NASA. Maybe it'll bring up some kind of Easter egg, right?
Yeah.
So basically in 2015, when they did, actually 2014, when they did well enough to be taken seriously by NASA, they were awarded $6.8 billion combined to Boeing and SpaceX.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Designed, and this is in 2014, to build a spacecraft capable of flying astronauts to the station. I haven't heard crap about Boeing, so what's Boeing up to?
Huh.
Because they're supposed to launch too.
Yeah.
So, and Boeing actually is the old school corporation / government because they worked together on many, many things. They would be like the old NASA.
Yeah.
And here we have SpaceX, which is really not at all government, who's put it up there already. They've gone out and flying their thing. And then you've got Boeing, which is the old school sort of way of looking at NASA and the launch vehicles and spacecrafts that we have. They haven't done squat. Theirs is called Starliner. Where is that? And it's like they encountered trouble almost immediately upon reaching orbit.
Oh,
right.
Wow.
And, Boeing and national officials had to fix the software problems that prevented the spacecraft from reaching the space station in the first place. And so I hate to say it, but when you look at like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, General Electric, all these companies out there that were putting into our space program in the past and charging all that money, that's like the old school way. And then you look at Elon Musk and SpaceX, which is commercialized, it's younger, hipper. I mean, the mission commander guy looked like he had a ponytail, right?
Mm-hmm.
They seem to be doing it because they're doing things without the sort of, the past looking at them. They do things in a different way because they're everything, even launching and fueling these vehicles that they use to get into space is done completely differently than NASA would do it.
Yeah.
So it's like they only had a reference guide to go by when they made their space program, and the rest of it they figured out on their own in a new and modern way, whereas old school Boeing and everybody else is trying to do the old school NASA way, and it ain't working.
Yeah. It takes a fresh perspective for innovation.
Right. And, when they fired up and sent somebody to the moon, I think it was July 16th, 1969. I wasn't even born yet.
Yeah.
And they pretty much use the same technology. So I've been watching space since I was born, and here it is 1981. The space shuttle goes up. It's an amazing thing. And then you have this happening today, which is like, wow, here it is almost 40 years later or whatever. I'm watching this stuff on TV, and it looked like it should look, and it went the way it should go. And, I think that's been a big part of the problem with NASA and people's satisfaction with our space launch and NASA has been the fact that these rockets that we're launching into space, like even with the space shuttle, they don't look cool.
No.
They're not cool looking at all.
Yeah.
I mean, if you watch a television show where, it was all about space and, it was realistically and accurate in every scientific detail of what we currently have and what we know about space, it'd be boring and look stupid. We need spacecraft that look cool. And I hate to say it, but the module looked cool, right?
Yeah.
The SpaceX, the Dragon Crew module looked really cool when it was created back in 2005. I'm not a big fan of the paint scheme.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. I mean, it is pretty neat looking, but they need to change the paint scheme up a little bit. We don't need no glossy stuff, no fingerprint magnet spacecraft. It needs to be,
Gosh.
It's just funny though, because that's kind of how it is. Even the launch tower is black and silver
and then touch screens on the inside, which is the one aspect of all sci-fi I've been looking forward to.
Yeah, they got nice touch screens, but they spent 3.5 minutes talking about the little hand bar, the little bar underneath the touch screens where you can rest your hands, little hand rest.
Yeah.
So when you're touching those lower keys and stuff like that on the bottom, they even have a little place to place their fingers and they can rest their hands when they're touching.
Well, ergonomics is important in space.
It is, but it wasn't so important to talk about that for it's like that's a level of innovation and stuff. Because I got to be honest with you, we watched it on Discovery Channel and we also popped back over to ABC.
Yeah.
ABC was embarrassing with the people that they had. You got these people and one guy, I don't even want to say his name because number one, I don't remember, but number two, he was trying to say that the way the capsule shape is of the current launch that was happening was almost like a throwback to the old school sort of capsule.
Yeah. He was like, is the needle shape of the capsule a throwback or harken back to an earlier era? And then astronaut Katie, who they had as a correspondent during the whole takeoff, she's like, physics doesn't change.
Yeah. She just shut him down. And it was kind of embarrassing, man, because, they're talking about social distancing and stuff like that. And she paused and just kind of said, well, family has been quarantined with them for a week, so they're good.
And that's the other thing, because it was did the news anchors not pay attention until half an hour ago? I mean, because they've been talking, SpaceX, NASA, they've all been talking about this, the social distancing and everything. It's been published on science.com. It's been, on various YouTube videos. Yeah. These people have practiced social distancing, and they're smart people.
This should have been on every freaking channel, and it wasn't. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, CBS and NBC, the other two, right? Because you have ABC, CBS, and NBC. ABC at least broadcasted most of it.
Yeah.
Right? And had NASA experts there. When I was looking at it and I kind of popped back and forth, I didn't see NBC doing anything about this launch. They had it was either golf or tennis. Right? And CBS, same thing. And they weren't even current.
Yeah.
They were showing, one of them was showing something from 2012 and the other one was showing something from 2017. They weren't even covering this. And, as I'm getting to old geezer status now because I'm going to be almost 50. I was just like, well, you know what? Screw you, CBS. I'm done with you.
Yeah.
And the same thing with NBC. I was thinking to myself, screw you, NBC. I'm done with you. Because this is an American thing, man. We launched this thing into space. I say we because, I'm sure somehow or another I helped. Right?
Stop.
I don't know, right? This was a big deal.
And
they couldn't even
be
put
bothered.
something from 2012 on TV. It's like, come on, man.
And that's the thing. Right.
And that's why our current ABC, NBC, and CBS are dying.
It bothers me so much because right now, the whole country as a whole, we kind of need some hope. We kind of need some positivity. This would have been a great moment to broadcast for 2 hours, a little bit of hope.
Yeah.
A little bit of something good. No.
You know what? The way 2020 is going now, somebody on the high up may have said, you know what? 2020 has been a garbage year so far. We would not want to publicly broadcast the explosion and killing of Bob and Doug on TV. I'm serious, man. Think about it.
I know. I held my breath because I was like, Getting
That's why I
anxiety.
kind of think that on Discovery Channel, I think they had a built-in delay
Yeah.
just in case something like that happened,
Yeah.
which would explain some of their glitches. But then again, they do have cameras and they're launching into space and they're, downloading and, and we're ones to talk about the internet as in we don't have any because we, broadcast from a bunker in the hills of Western North Carolina where there is no service where we are, literally, honestly.
Yeah.
So I can't complain too much, but I was very happy. Very, very happy.
Yeah.
And I was happy that the weather was good. They were worried about it, and it's like, now they've got like 18 hours after they launched to get up to the space station and do the intricate docking steps.
Yeah.
And basically what's supposed to happen with this particular spacecraft is supposed to do this autonomously.
Cool.
Like automatically, just like an auto launch. You just get in, hit the button, go up into space, whiz around for a while, sort of match up and basically dock without any kind of intervention. That's the crap we expect with 2020.
Yeah.
Being as this year. So anyway, we thought we'd do the podcast about that sort of thing and talk about some of the stuff that's been happening with space. We're glad the space race has happened again and it's back in play. We're glad the Americans are back in space using American stuff. And you know what? I know that there's lots of countries where a lot of the things that are bought and used and assembled and created and all that stuff came from other countries and stuff like that. But overall, this is, effectively American astronauts being launched into space from American soil. The first time in almost 10 years. And I'm happy for it. It's good.
Yeah, like 2011, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's good. And, we were going to go ahead and talk about a whole bunch of other stuff. But, the fact that the Russian space head accuses the U.S. and Elon Musk of planning nuclear war on Mars, I don't even think we need to.
Yeah, I do want to mention, because you do have this in here, the 8 more Navy pilot UFO sightings made public. This actually hit the news about a week ago. And yes, it has. The problem is nobody's really talked about this.
Yeah. Well, see, that's part of it. We have such a short attention span these days that nobody seems to care.
Yeah. And, for everybody who saw the Tic Tac UFO videos from what is now called the USS Nimitz UFO incident, and was like, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Well, your Titanic moment may have arrived.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is from Paul Seaborn again, who seems to make the rounds every time we find something cool.
But, basically the Freedom of Information Act officer handling the requests said that these were the only 8 reports in the web-enabled safety system, aviation mishap, and hazard reporting system to deal with naval aviation encounters with unidentified objects, balloons, and any other similar objects anywhere. So basically, there's 8 more accounts available.
Yeah, it's centralized computer database is supposed to contain all that stuff.
And there is
to get to it.
Yeah, there's one sentence in here from Mr. Seaborn. It's like, let's ignore the believability of, and this is proverbial air quotes, the only 8 reports.
Yeah, there's got to be more, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I'm like,
Yeah, and we probably should say it's Seaburn. We keep saying born because we're stupid.
Oh, that's the thing. Everybody wonders where my accent is from.
Yeah.
It's Virginia.
It's from the internet.
Well, that too. It is heavily from the internet.
You can trust me. I'm from the internet.
But
Paul Seaburn.
Yeah, but
it should be born.
Yeah, in Virginia, it would be Seaborn because of all the streets and stuff like that.
At least you don't have a Boston accent. And if anybody out there listening from Boston, I used to live there. So, hey, you know what I'm talking about.
Don't.
Yeah.
I actually bring in a few people from up north.
I know. That's why I said that. I've lived up north. I can say these things if I want. So, yeah, but then when they talk about in some of these reports, there was another F-18 or FA-18F Super Hornet had an encounter with multiple unidentified aerial devices.
Yeah.
While investigating the first pair of UADs, another 2 appeared to pass through the basically the FLIR field of vision at high speed, but didn't appear on the radar. When they talk about the next day, they had 2 more radar contacts with another UAD.
Yeah.
And 3 days later, the crew of another FA-18F had a near midair collision with a balloon-like object.
Huh.
Now, here's the thing.
Yeah.
In one of our previous episodes, I don't know if it was a public episode or a Patreon-only episode, because we do have patron-only podcast episodes where we go a little bit deeper and a little bit more probably interesting.
Yeah.
Stuff that we talk about. I think that a huge chunk of UFO sightings are actually military technology and have been that way for a very long time. And the latest and greatest thing that we have is drones, right?
Yeah.
Well, if the average technology lifespan of the military or the government compared to commercial or public is between 10 and 30-year difference, as in maybe they're 10 to 30 years ahead of us,
Yeah.
it would make sense that a lot of the stuff that they're seeing right now may be military technology. Because there is the correlation, too, of the U.S. Navy seeing these things and before that applying for patents for, basically undisclosed and different types of alternative energy sources to power planes, like propulsion systems.
Okay.
They're filing patents for it. So what if these guys are actually seeing basically military technology? They're in the wrong place at the wrong time or whatever, man. Or, maybe the people that have the technology, as in our government, is like trying to see how it would interact with some of the best military technology on the planet, which is ours. You never know. I mean, they may be gathering results and information, stuff like that too, and not telling everybody because they don't feel it necessary. And they certainly wouldn't tell just a regular old fighter jet pilot.
Yeah.
I don't know. But I think what they've seen and what they are seeing is basically Earth-made stuff.
I know. And it does bother me because some of the video evidence that's out there that I actually am, find compelling. It's the stuff where the object is moving extremely fast.
Yeah.
Or moving outside our normal understanding of how aircraft should fly.
Right.
And that's
our normal understanding of how our aircraft fly.
And even with, there's some that's out there, and it's like, even with like I used to watch you fly the drone in New Mexico all the time, and I'm like, wow, okay, that's a weird flight, It doesn't even resemble some of the drone flight, So I'm like, I would love to know what those are.
It may just be a modern version of a drone. I mean, if you look at like Nazi Bell and things like that, where the Nazis had flying UFOs allegedly and all the stuff that went into that, and some of those weren't using standard propulsion measures. They were using like basically propulsion designed off of really ancient technology.
Yeah. Like
Mercury drive engines type thing, where you use gravitational, where you use the Earth's gravity and basically as a way to sort of propel yourself, right?
Yeah.
Whether you ever seen two magnets go together and you have like a negative and a positive, right? And they connect. Bow. They're connected. But when you put positive to positive, they repel each other.
Yeah.
And the idea is that using that Mercury engine, right, you control that sort of thing, and you're using basically a repelling of the Earth's magnetic field to propel you.
Yeah.
If you have that as your propulsion, then you can do all these fantastical maneuvers and things like that. Well, the problem with that is that you still have to worry about, humans and the fact that they can't take the G-forces and that sort of thing. So what if you took them out of the equation, made them drones, and used the same propulsion technology, do all that stuff? You could go from A to B in no time flat.
Which is great because it means, yes, unmanned craft, unmanned possibilities, but a lot of our end goal is to involve humans in flight.
Nope. That's the exact opposite. A lot of our goal in military is to take the human aspect out of it.
Well, as far as exploration is concerned.
Well, yeah, as far as space exploration and stuff like that, but as far as everything else, if we could remove the risk, right,
of
a human, then we don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
That's why the president authorized so many drone strikes. And I'm not talking about our current president. It's like, because there's no human aspect to it,
Yeah.
It's being flown, so it doesn't place an American at risk, right? And the drone attack happens and it flies away. And that drone operator may be, in Arizona somewhere. Who knows?
Yeah.
Instead of being in Afghanistan. So they want to remove the human aspect out of it. So it somehow or another makes it less humanistic to do that sort of thing with warfare. I don't know. I mean, think about it like this. Here recently, in the past decade, these things have become super popular. We have railgun technology where you can fire a projectile.
Which I still love watching. I don't know who
and that uses
is.
magnets too. And that's exactly what it does, is it actually repels that projectile, right? We have lasers on ships now because they just fired one and shot a drone out of the sky with it, and chances are it'll be on every ship. So we've got, particle gun or railgun technology. We have lasers. We have 3D holograms that don't need anything but a spot to show up in. We have all this drone technology. We have all of this stuff happening now, which the military has probably had in maybe 30 years ahead of us. So, I mean, if you think about it like this, compare a car that's 30 years old to a car now. I mean, if you go from when I started driving, I had a 1978 Chevette.
Yeah.
Compare that 1978 Chevette to any modern car in that same class. Be like a small one, like a Chevy Spark. Be about the same size, that kind of thing. This is Chevy to Chevy.
Yeah.
So a 1978 Chevette, a little tiny little hatchback eco box, compared to a Chevy Spark, which is a little tiny EcoBox, they are light years different. I mean, heck, 30 years ago, cars were just cars, right? Now they drive themselves.
Okay.
I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
So, and that's just a technology leap. So I think with our leap in technology and the fact that, the government and the military have to keep ahead and all that sort of thing, and, primarily because other countries are doing the same thing, a lot of what we see is actually military technology or undisclosed. Let's just say undisclosed technology.
I prefer undisclosed.
Yeah. So we see this undisclosed technology that's basically terrestrial based and not alien based, I would think. Now, who's to say that some of the ideas or whatever didn't come from some crashed Roswell, which is possible. Who knows, right? But all I know is we put somebody in space today, 2 people, Bob and Doug, launched from Florida successfully so far through commercial endeavors, and that has changed and will have changed, if this is completely successful, human history. Because if they can put people up in space all the time now, and it's not, that's a big deal. Because what does that mean for you? If you're listening to this podcast and you're like 12 years old, by the time you're 35 or so, you could probably ride up into space for about $1,700 for a ticket.
Yeah, that's actually what I think I posted on Facebook was one of my friends, she watched it with her kid, and, my little brother's probably watching with his kids too, and it's like, man, in their lifetime, they're going to be able to go to space.
Yeah.
That's, I'm sad it's not going to be in my lifetime, but at least I'm hopeful. And that's the thing, hope,
Yeah.
I am hopeful that in their lifetime, it won't be such a dream.
Yeah. Well, especially when, our suborbital planes that we have that are probably way better than X-37B start showing up in commercial endeavors, it's a possibility you might just be able to get on like a U.S. Airways flight and fly through the atmosphere, get out into space and see it and pop back down and fly somewhere else.
Yeah.
That might be entirely possible. But I think at this point in the game, we are just about done with the podcast. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up. But I will say this. If you're looking for something to watch before the coronavirus pandemic restriction or quarantine ends, you should probably head on over to Amazon. And while you're there, search for On the Trail of UFOs. And if you're Amazon Prime, you get to watch it for free.
It's streaming now.
Streaming now for freezy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Seth Breedlove, Small Town Monster Guys, put it out there for free, which is pretty nice. And just so you know, we're actually in there somewhere. And one of the episodes, I want to say 5. I can't remember. Anyway.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing. So if you're still looking for something to watch, you should actually watch that. If you like coffee, we have coffee for sale. It's an amazing coffee. It's super tasty. It's a Bigfoot blend if you want to check that out. If you're looking for something for Father's Day.
And that's through the shop that you can find on our CreepGeeks.com website. And we do have a bunch of stuff up there right now. I'm trying to add more. In the meantime, patreon.com/CreepGeeks if you'd like to support the show. This episode was brought to you by Adam, James, Dave, John, and now John.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have patrons.
Yeah.
And you should go over and check it out. We have a lot of, free stuff to look at, that kind of thing. But we do exclusive podcasts specifically for patrons on our Patreon page. So check it out. It's patreon.com/CreepGeeks. But yeah.
We're going to have an episode coming up for them real soon about something real interesting.
Yeah. Do you know what it is? I'll give you a little hint. So our Patreon Plus episode number 5 is going to be about the 37th parallel.
Ooh.
Yeah. Anyway, that being said, we're going to take a second and go check out some more space stuff. But anyway, do appreciate you listening to the podcast. Thank you very much.
Questions, comments, concerns, give us a call, 575-208-4025, and leave a message or contact@creepgeeks.com.
Yep. You can also check us out on Facebook.
Yep.
Go to our Facebook page and you can participate. Anyway, see you later. Take it easy. Bye-bye.
Bye.